The lonely Black Widow found the paralyzed Comanche man sprawled beneath the cottonwoods, his legs twisted beneath him like broken kindling. Ellie Williams crouched in the dust, her weathered hands hovering over his chest as it rose and fell. In shallow rhythm, blood had pooled in the earth around him. Dark stains marked where he'd crawled before his strength gave out. Vultures circled overhead, their shadows dancing across his still form. His eyes opened, black as winter night, burning with something fiercer than pain. "Leave me." The words came thick, accented. His English carried the weight of a man who'd learned it from enemies. Ellie studied his face. High cheekbones marked by war paint, now smeared with dirt and dried blood. A warrior's bearing even in defeat. The kind of man her late husband Samuel would have called dangerous. Can't do that. She slipped her arms beneath his shoulders. He was heavier than expected, solid muscle despite his condition. His legs dragged. Uselessly as she pulled him toward her mule. "You don't understand," his voice cracked. "I am Comanche. I understand plenty." The words came out harder than intended. She'd understood plenty about impossible choices since Samuel died. About being alone in country that didn't want her. About the kind of decisions that kept a person breathing one more day. She hefted him across the mule's back. He groaned but didn't cry out. Pride, she recognized. The kind that could get them both killed. Thunder rolled across the prairie. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and heavy with rain. The kind of weather that washed away tracks and kept sensible. Folks indoors. Her trading post sat a mile away, tucked into a grove of trees beside a creek. Neutral ground, she'd always called it. The place where settlers and tribes could meet without bloodshed. Where a black woman could make a living if she kept her head down and her mouth shut. That neutrality was about to die. She led the mule home as the first drops began to fall. Fat, warm drops that turned the dust to mud and filled the air with the scent of wet earth. The Comanche warrior said nothing during the journey, but she felt his eyes on her, watching, calculating. Her cabin was small but solid. 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, walls thick enough to stop bullets. Samuel had built it to last. Built it to protect her when he couldn't. She dragged the warrior inside and laid him on the bed. His breathing had grown labored. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cooling air. "What's your name?" He turned his face away. Blood seeped through his shirt where something sharp had torn the fabric. Not a bullet wound, something else. "I'm Ellie." Still nothing. She fetched water from the well and clean cloth from her trunk. When she returned, his eyes were closed. For a moment she thought he'd died. Then his chest moved, barely perceptible. "Hector," the word came so quietly she almost missed it. "Hector Escaton." She nodded and began cleaning his wounds. 3 deep gashes across his ribs, rope burns on his wrists. His legs bore the worst damage. Something heavy had crushed them. A horse, maybe, or a wagon wheel. He watched her work without speaking. His jaw clenched when she touched the deepest cuts, but he made no sound. Whatever had happened to him, he'd faced it like a warrior. Rain drummed against the roof. The storm had arrived in earnest now, turning the world beyond her windows into a gray blur. No one would be traveling tonight. No one would come looking. She heated water over the fire and found her herbs. Willow bark for the pain. Sage for infection. Plants Samuel had taught her to recognize during their brief marriage. Plants his grandfather had shown him, back when such knowledge was passed down in whispers. "You speak our tongue." The words startled her. She hadn't realized she'd been muttering the old names as she worked. Some. How? She met his eyes. They held suspicion now, sharp as broken glass. The kind of look that meant survival hung in the balance. "My husband knew things." "Your husband was Comanche." It wasn't a question. Hector had seen something in her face, heard something in her voice. The truth she'd kept hidden for 3 years. Heart. She returned to her work, grinding herbs between her palms. The familiar motions calmed her, gave her hands something to do while her mind raced. He's dead, I know. The certainty in his voice made her look up. Hector's expression had changed. The suspicion remained, but something else had joined it. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. You're the woman at the trading post. I am, the one who deals fairly with all tribes. I try. He was quiet. For a long moment. Outside, the storm raged on. Wind howled through the trees, sending branches scraping against the walls. The kind of night that made people grateful for solid shelter and warm fires. Why did you bring me here? The question hung between them like smoke. She could tell him about Christian duty or human decency. Could speak of the loneliness that ate at her bones during the long winter nights. Could mention the way his broken form had reminded her of Samuel, bleeding out in a field far from home. Instead, she told him the truth. Because leaving you, there would have been wrong. He studied her face in the firelight. Whatever he saw there seemed to satisfy him. His eyes closed again, and his breathing began to even out. She finished cleaning his wounds and covered him with her best blanket. Come morning, she'd face the consequences of her choice. Tonight, she'd simply done what felt right. The storm continued its assault on the world outside. But inside her cabin, two broken people had found shelter from the wind. Dawn broke gray and cold. Hector's fever had broken during the night, but his legs remained still as stone beneath the blanket. Ellie stirred the fire and heated water for tea. The familiar ritual steadied her hands. He watched her move about the cabin. His eyes tracked every gesture, every pause. A predator's awareness, even flat on his back. You should have left me. We covered that. She brought him tea brewed with willow bark. He refused it with a shake of his head. Pride again, sharp as winter wind. Drink it or hurt more, your choice. He took the cup. Their fingers brushed as she handed it over. His skin was rough, scarred from years of fighting. The hands of a warrior who'd seen too much. How long have I been here? 3 days. His jaw tightened. 3 days was enough for search parties. Enough for someone to notice he was missing. They'll come looking. I know. She returned to her work, grinding herbs for poultices. The steady rhythm of pestle against mortar filled the silence. Outside, birds began their morning songs. The world continued its turn, indifferent to the danger growing beneath her roof. You could claim the bounty. The words came quiet, testing. She looked up from her work. His dark eyes held no accusation, only curiosity. As if he genuinely wondered what kind of woman she was. What bounty? The cavalry, they're offering gold for Comanche prisoners. She hadn't known. The information settled in her stomach like cold stones. Gold meant survival. Meant not worrying about the next meal or the next payment to keep scavengers away from her door. How much gold? Enough to buy passage east. Away from this place. Away from the isolation. Away from the whispers. When she rode into town. Away from the loneliness that carved hollows in her chest during the long nights. She set down her pestle and met his gaze. I'm not turning you in. Why? The question hung between them. She could speak of right and wrong, of the promises Samuel had made her swear before he died. Could mention the way her husband's blood had looked on his uniform, dark and final. Instead, she told him what mattered. Because you're not a bounty, you're a man. Something shifted in his expression. The wariness remained, but beneath it stirred something else. Recognition maybe, or the first fragile shoots of trust. Days passed in careful routine. She tended his wounds while he endured her touch with stoic silence. The gashes across his ribs began to heal. The rope burns faded to pale marks. His legs showed no improvement. He refused to speak of what had happened. refused to explain how he'd ended up broken beneath the cottonwoods. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. She began the work of healing anyway. Move your toes. He stared at the ceiling. Try. They don't move. Try anyway. She placed her hands on his feet through the blanket. Warm pressure, gentle but insistent. The kind of touch that said she wouldn't give up even if he had. Nothing happened. His feet remained still as carved wood. Again tomorrow. He turned his face to the wall. The fifth morning brought visitors. Hoofbeats in the distance, growing closer. Ellie stepped onto her porch and counted 3 riders approaching through the trees. She recognized the lead horse before she saw its rider. Dutch van der Linde rode with the easy confidence of a man who owned whatever ground his horse touched. His gang had been working the territory for months, taking what they pleased and leaving destruction in their wake. Behind him rode 2 others, their faces hidden beneath hat brims. Miss Williams. Dutch tipped his hat with mock courtesy. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. Gentlemen. She kept her voice steady, her hands loose at her sides. Inside the cabin, Hector lay trapped and defenseless. The knowledge sat heavy in her chest. Fine morning for trading. What do you need? Dutch swung down from his saddle. His boots struck the ground with deliberate weight. He was performing, she realized, making a show of power for his companions. Ammunition, food, information. I can help with the first 2, and the third? His eyes searched her face, looking for tells, for weaknesses. The kind of examination that stripped away pretense and left only truth. I mind my own business, smart policy. He followed her into the trading post portion of her cabin. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with goods from a dozen sources. Bullets and beans. Whiskey and wool. The neutral ground where money mattered more than blood. Dutch selected ammunition with practiced ease. His fingers moved over the cartridges, checking weights and measurements. Behind him, one of his men stood guard at the door. Heard there was trouble with the Comanche. Ellie's hands stilled on the ledger where she recorded sales. The ink from her pen spread into a small dark stain. There's always trouble with someone. This was different. Cavalry found signs of a fight near Red Rock Canyon. Blood, but no bodies. She forced herself to continue writing. Numbers and dates, the mundane details of commerce. Her handwriting remained steady through sheer will. Colonel, Favors is offering a reward. Good money for information about survivors. How much? The question slipped out before she could stop it. Dutch's smile widened. $50. More if the information leads to capture. $50. More than she made in 3 months of trading. Enough to buy supplies for winter, to repair the roof, to stop worrying about wolves at the door. Haven't seen any Comanche. Course not. Dutch paid for his purchases and tipped his hat again. His men mounted up without a word. They rode away as quietly as they'd come, leaving only dust and the memory of threat. She waited until they disappeared before returning to the cabin. Hector lay exactly as she'd left him, but his eyes were alert. Listening. You heard. I heard. $50. I know. She sat in the chair beside the bed. Her hands shook slightly as she picked up her needlework. The normal response to danger, to the realization that her sanctuary had been breached. Why didn't you call out? The question surprised her. She looked up from her stitching to find him watching her with something approaching wonder. Because $50 isn't worth a man's life. It could be your life if they find me here. I know that too. They sat in silence as afternoon shadows lengthened across the floor. Outside, wind moved through the trees with the sound of distant voices. The world continued its turn, carrying them deeper into danger with each passing hour. That night, she began teaching his legs to remember movement. Gentle massage, careful stretching. Her hands worked over muscles that had forgotten their purpose. This might hurt. Everything hurts. She bent his knee slowly, feeling for resistance. His breath caught, but he made no sound. Warrior's discipline, harder than iron, again. Again. They worked until sweat beaded on his forehead. Until her hands ached from the careful pressure. Until something in his left foot twitched, barely perceptible. They both saw it. The tiny movement that meant nerves still carried messages, that hope hadn't died completely. Tomorrow we do more. He nodded, his eyes fixed on his feet. For the first time since she'd found him, Hector looked like a man who believed in tomorrow. 2 weeks passed before Hector could bend his knees without groaning. Ellie worked his muscles each morning, her hands steady against his resistance. The routine became prayer, repeated until both believed in its power. She caught him trying to move his toes when he thought she wasn't watching. Small victories, hidden behind pride. The sight warmed something cold in her chest. You don't have to pretend it's not working. He looked up from his feet, caught. For a moment his warrior's mask slipped, revealing something younger underneath. Hope, maybe, or fear of hoping. The feeling is returning. Good. She helped him sit up against the headboard. His torso was strong, broad shoulders tapering to narrow hips. Scars mapped his skin, each one a story he'd never tell. The marks of a man who'd survived more fights than he'd lost. Tell me about the herbs you use. She paused in her grinding. He'd never asked questions before, never shown interest in her. Methods, the change meant something, though she couldn't say what. Willow bark for pain, sage for infection. My husband taught me. He was a medicine man? He was many things, the truth pressed against her teeth. Samuel had been part of 2 worlds, belonging fully to neither. The weight of that knowledge had crushed him slowly, year by year. What was his name? Samuel Williams. Hector's. Eyes sharpened. Memory stirred behind them, recognition blooming slow as dawn. I knew a man named Samuel. Rode with the cavalry as a scout, spoke our language. The herbs spilled from her suddenly nerveless fingers. Green powder scattered across the floor, filling the air with the scent of sage and secrets. That was him. He was your husband? For 3 years. Hector was quiet for a long moment. Outside, wind moved through the trees with the sound of whispered conversations. The world held its breath, waiting for whatever came next. He saved my brother's life once, warned him about an ambush. The words hit her chest like thrown stones. Samuel had never spoken of such things. Never mentioned the lives he'd touched in his careful balancing act between worlds. He never told me. He was a good man. Caught between peoples who didn't understand each other, yes. She swept up the spilled herbs with shaking hands. The fee. Routine motion steadied her, gave her something to focus on besides the ache in her throat. How did he die? Fever, after the war ended. The lie came easily, worn smooth by repetition. She'd told it so many times she almost believed it herself. Better than the truth, which would have painted Samuel as a traitor to both sides. I'm sorry. Me too. That evening she began teaching him to read English. Letters first, then simple words. His fingers traced the shapes on paper, learning new ways to make meaning. The intimacy of shared learning surprised them both. Why? Do you do this? Everyone should know letters. That's not what I mean. She looked up from the primer, meeting his dark eyes. They held questions she wasn't ready to answer. About loneliness and purpose. About the way healing others helped heal herself. I don't know. It was the most honest thing she'd said in weeks. Days blended into routine. Morning exercises, afternoon lessons, evenings by the fire. The world beyond her cabin faded until it seemed distant as a half-remembered dream. Only the 2 of them mattered, working toward something neither dared name. Arthur Morgan arrived on a Tuesday, riding slow and easy through the trees. Ellie recognized him from Dutch's gang, though he'd never spoken during their visits. younger than the others with careful eyes that saw too much. "Miss Williams, Mr. Morgan." He dismounted with practiced grace. His horse was well cared for, the gear clean and oiled. Details that spoke of a man who understood the difference between surviving and living. "Dutch sent me to check on you." "I'm fine. That's good to hear." Arthur's eyes moved over her cabin, taking in details. The extra firewood stacked by the door. The larger pot of stew simmering over the fire. Signs of a household feeding more than one person. "You been eating well?" "I have. Good, winter's coming. Need to keep your strength up." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell leather and tobacco on his clothes. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Dutch thinks you might be hiding something." Her heart hammered against her ribs. Inside the cabin, Hector lay trapped and listening. One word from Arthur would end everything. "I'm not hiding anything. I know." The words carried weight beyond their meaning. Arthur stepped back, his voice returning to normal volume. "You need anything, you send a word. These are dangerous times. For folks living alone, I'll remember." He mounted up and rode away, leaving her standing in the doorway. The threat hung in the air like smoke, visible and choking. That night, Hector tried to stand. She helped him swing his legs over the side of the bed. His feet touched the floor, toes curling against the cold wood. Muscles trembled with the effort of supporting his weight. "Easy, I can do this." He gripped her shoulders, using her strength to pull himself upright. For a moment they stood, pressed together, her hands on his waist, his breath warm against her forehead. "Now let go. Hector, let go." She released him slowly, ready to catch him if he fell. He swayed, arms windmilling for balance. His legs shook with the effort of remembering their purpose. One step, trembling, uncertain but forward. 2 steps. 3. Then his strength gave out and he stumbled. She caught him before he hit the floor, her arms wrapping around his chest. They sank to the ground together, breathing hard. "I stood." "You did." "I walked." "You did." They remained on the floor, her arms around him, his head against her shoulder. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, wind sang through the trees with the voice of change. "Ellie, yes. Thank you." The words carried the weight of everything unsaid. Gratitude for healing, for hope. For the quiet revolution of caring when caring was dangerous. She felt tears prick her eyes, salt born of relief and something deeper. "You're welcome." Later, she helped him back to bed. His legs were stronger now, able to bear some weight. The progress was undeniable, written in the set of his shoulders and the light in his eyes. "Tomorrow I'll walk farther." Tomorrow. She banked the fire and settled into her chair. Sleep would come eventually, but first she wanted to watch him. Rest, to memorize the peace on his face, the steady rise and fall of his chest. Healing was happening. Not just in his legs, but in the space between them. Something fragile and precious, growing in the shelter of her small cabin. Something worth protecting, no matter the cost. Outside, the wind carried new scents. Change was coming, riding on the air currents from the north. She could feel it in her bones, the way animals sense storms. Before the first clouds appeared. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, the world beyond her door could wait. Tonight, she had work to do and a man learning to walk again. October brought frost to the grass and strength to Hector's legs. He could walk the length of the cabin now, steady steps that carried him from wall to wall. The sound of his footfalls had become music to Ellie's ears. She watched him practice each morning, his movements growing more confident. The warrior's grace was returning, measured and deliberate. He no longer needed walls for balance, no longer stumbled over his own feet. "You could leave now." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He paused mid-step, turning to face her across the small room. Something flickered in his eyes, too quick to read. "I could, But you won't. No, he crossed to where she sat mending a shirt. His steps were sure now, each one a small victory. He settled beside her on the narrow bench, close enough that she could feel warmth radiating from his skin. Why? You know why? She did know. The knowledge sat between them like a banked fire, glowing with unspoken heat. 3 months of shared silence had built something neither wanted to name. Something that made leaving impossible. This can't last. I know. They'll find us eventually. I know that too. Outside, wind stripped the last leaves from the cottonwoods. Bare branches scratched against the windows, spelling out warnings in a language older than words. Winter was coming, and with it, the kind of cold that froze secrets in the ground. Arthur Morgan was here again yesterday. Hector's hands stilled on the book he'd been reading. She'd taught him well. Too well. Soon he'd need nothing more from her. What did he want? To warn. Me. Dutch suspects something. What kind of warning? The kind that means we're running out of time. That afternoon, cavalry scouts appeared on the horizon. Blue uniforms against the gray sky, moving with military precision. Colonel Favors had arrived in the territory, bringing his hunt for the missing Comanche. Ellie watched them through her window, counting horses and men. 20 soldiers, enough to search every cabin and cellar within 50 miles. Enough to turn over every stone until they found what they were looking for. How long do we have? Hector stood beside her at the window, his shoulder touching hers. The casual contact sent warmth through her chest. When had they become people? Who touched without thinking? A day, maybe 2. We should run. Where? The question hung between them like a challenge. 2 people with nowhere to go, no place that would welcome them together. The world beyond her cabin was measured in miles of hostility. South Mexico. You have family there? I have nothing there. Then why? He turned from the window to face her. His hands found her shoulders, fingers gentle against the worn fabric of her dress. The touch was different now, charged with something that made her breath catch. Because nothing is better than this death. Is that what we're facing? You know it is. She did know. Had known since the moment she'd pulled him from beneath the cottonwoods. Some choices carried their own consequences, written in blood and sealed with time. I won't run. Ellie. This is my home. It's just a place. It's where Samuel built our life, where I buried our dreams, where I found you. The last words came out softer than intended. He heard them anyway, saw the truth she'd been hiding behind practical concerns and careful distance. Where you found me, yes. His hands slid from her shoulders to her face, fingers tracing the line of her jaw. She leaned into the touch, letting herself feel what she'd been fighting for months. I found you too. Hector. I found you, and I'm not letting go. The kiss was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, then deeper as months of unspoken longing found their voice. She tasted hope on his lips, felt the tremor in his hands as he pulled her closer. When they broke apart, the world had changed. The air between them crackled with possibility, with the dangerous magic of 2 people who'd chosen each other despite everything. We can't. We already have. The world won't let us. Then we'll make our own world. That evening, Arthur Morgan returned. His horse was lathered with sweat, steam rising from its flanks in the cold air. He'd ridden hard to reach her before. Nightfall. Miss Williams, Mr. Morgan, we need to talk. Private. She followed him away from the cabin, out of earshot of the windows. Stars emerged overhead, cold points of light in the gathering darkness. Dutch knows. The words hit her like thrown stones. She'd been expecting them, but hearing them still stole her breath. Knows what? About your guest. About why you've been buying extra food, burning more firewood. I don't know what you mean. Yes, you do. Arthur stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. In the starlight, his face was all angles and shadows. I've been watching you for weeks, trying to figure out what you were hiding. Took me a while to put it together. Arthur, you got a Comanche in there, the one from Red Rock Canyon." She said nothing. Silence was her only weapon now, the last defense against the truth that would destroy them both. "Dutch plans to take him tomorrow. Turn him over to the colonel for the reward." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you remind me of someone. Someone who deserved better than what this world gave her." "I don't understand. You don't have to. Just know that you got maybe 6 hours before Dutch arrives with his whole gang." "What do you want me to do?" "What you should have done weeks ago. Run." Arthur turned and walked back toward his horse. His boots crunched on the frost-covered ground, each step carrying him away from her and toward whatever waited in the darkness. "Arthur," he paused, one hand on his saddle horn. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when you're both still." Breathing comes sunrise. He mounted up and rode away, leaving her standing alone beneath the stars. The cold bit through her shawl, reminding her that winter was coming whether she was ready or not. She found Hector waiting inside, his few possessions already packed. He'd heard enough through the walls to understand what Arthur's visit meant. "You knew. I guessed. And you're ready to go." "I'm ready to go with you. Where?" "Wherever. You'll have me." She looked around the cabin one last time. Samuel's books on the shelf, the quilt her mother had made. The life she'd built from nothing after the war took everything else. "I'll have you anywhere. Then we go south, tonight." Tonight, they gathered what they could carry. Food, weapons, the small bag of gold coins she'd hidden beneath the floorboards. Everything else would stay behind, offerings to whatever gods protected desperate people. At the door, she turned back for one last look. The fire was dying in the hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls. This place had sheltered them, healed them, taught them to love each other. Now it was time to find out if love was strong enough to carry them through whatever came next. Hector took her hand as they stepped into the night. His fingers were warm against hers, steady and sure. Together, they walked into the darkness, leaving behind everything they'd known for the promise of something better. The stars watched them go, cold and distant and eternal. Behind them, the cabin stood empty, holding its secrets in the silence. Ahead lay the unknown, vast and dangerous, and filled with possibility. They walked south, following the creek toward uncertain dawn. They walked through the night, following deer trails that wound between the trees. Hector moved with quiet confidence, his legs carrying him over rough ground without faltering. The months of healing had restored more than strength. They'd given him back his warrior's grace. Ellie matched his pace, her skirts bundled in one hand to keep them clear of thorns. The bag of gold coins clinked softly against her hip with each step, everything she owned in the world reduced to what she could carry. Behind them, smoke rose from the direction of her cabin. Dutch had arrived to find his prize gone, leaving only empty rooms and cold ashes. The sight made her chest tighten, but she didn't look back again. How far to the river? 5 miles. And then? Then we see if Arthur was telling the truth. The river ran black under starlight, its surface broken by the occasional leap of a fish. Arthur had promised a boat would be waiting, hidden among the willows on the far bank. A way south that wouldn't leave tracks for the cavalry to follow. They found the boat where he'd said it would be. A small skiff, weathered but sound. Oars wrapped in cloth to muffle their sound. Even a canvas tarp to keep them dry. He kept his word. So far. Hector pushed the boat into the current while Ellie climbed in. The water was cold, autumn-fed, and running swift toward the distant sea. It would carry them away from everything they'd known, toward whatever waited in the south. They rowed in silence, taking turns at the oars. The current did most of the work, pulling them downstream through country that grew wilder with each mile. No settlements here, no roads or telegraph. Lines, Just the river and the night and the two of them. Dawn found them pulled up in a grove of cottonwoods, the boat hidden beneath trailing branches. They'd made good time, putting 20 miles between themselves and the cabin. But it wouldn't be enough if the cavalry had horses in daylight. We need to keep moving. The horses need rest. What? Horses? The voice came from behind them, calm and familiar. Arthur Morgan stepped out of the trees, leading 2 saddled mounts. His face was unreadable in the gray light. Figured you might need these. Ellie's hand moved toward the pistol tucked in her belt. Arthur saw the motion and shook his head. If I wanted you dead, you'd be dead. Why are you helping us? Because Dutch is wrong about a lot of things. But he's right about one. What's that? This country's got no place for people like us. People who don't fit the mold they're trying to make. Arthur handed her the reins to a bay mare. The horse was sound, well-fed, and ready for hard travel. The kind of mount that could carry them beyond the reach of pursuing cavalry. Where should we go? South. Past the Red River. There's a valley there, hidden in the hills. Folks there don't ask questions about where you came from. What kind of folks? The kind that understand about being different. Hector took the reins of the second horse, a sturdy roan with intelligent eyes. His movements were careful, testing the animal's temperament. The horse accepted him without fuss, recognizing another creature born to the wild places. What about Dutch? Dutch thinks you're dead. Figures you tried to run and didn't make it. Found some burned clothes by the river, some blood on the rocks. Whose blood? Mine. Arthur pulled back his sleeve, revealing a fresh bandage wrapped around his forearm. The white cloth was stained with red, evidence of the sacrifice he'd made to buy their freedom. Why? Because someone should get to choose their own ending. They mounted up as the sun climbed higher. Arthur led them away from the river, following trails that twisted through broken country. No roads here, just game paths and old Indian routes that avoided the settlements. The horses moved well together, their hooves finding purchase on rocky ground. Ellie felt the mare's strength beneath her, the easy rhythm of muscles working in harmony. This was what freedom felt like. Movement without destination, direction without constraint. Behind them, dust rose on the horizon, riders moving fast and closing ground. The cavalry had found their trail despite Arthur's deception. How many? Arthur pulled out a spyglass, studying the distant figures. His face was grim when he lowered it. Dozen men, maybe more. Can we outrun them? Maybe, if we're smart about it. They pushed the horses harder, climbing into hills that grew steeper with each mile. The trees thinned, giving way to rock and scrub brush. No cover here, just open ground and the relentless sun. The pursuit grew closer. Individual riders became visible, blue uniforms stark against the brown landscape. Colonel Favors rode at their head, his face set with the determination of a man who'd never learned to accept defeat. There. Hector pointed toward a narrow canyon cutting between 2 hills. The walls rose steep and high, offering shelter from the open ground. But it was also a trap, with only one way in and one way out. Too dangerous. It's our only chance. They turned toward the canyon as the first shots rang out behind them. The bullets went wide, fired from horseback at extreme range. But the sound carried across the hills, announcing their position to every ear within miles. The canyon mouth was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 horses abreast. They rode single file, hooves echoing off stone walls that rose 100 feet on either side. The air was cooler here, shadowed and still. How far does it go? Don't know. If it's a dead end ... Then we make our stand. The canyon wound deeper into the hills, following the path of some ancient river. Side passages branched off into darkness, offering possibilities they couldn't explore. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew louder. Then the walls began to widen. The canyon opened into a hidden valley, green grass stretching between scattered trees. A creek ran down the center, fed by springs that bubbled up from underground. It was beautiful, peaceful, untouched by the violence that raged beyond the hills. Look! Smoke rose from a cluster of buildings near the creek, a settlement hidden in the heart of the valley. As they rode closer, people emerged from the buildings. Men and women of every color, children playing in the grass. Faces that showed the mixing of bloodlines, the blending of worlds. This is it, the place Arthur mentioned? Has to be. An old woman approached them, her hair white as snow but her step steady. She wore a dress that mixed European cut with native patterns, a fusion that spoke of two worlds brought together. You're the ones Arthur told us about. Yes, ma'am. Welcome to Haven Valley. You're safe here. The word hit Ellie like a physical blow. Safe. She'd almost forgotten what it meant. Had lived so long with danger that peace felt foreign. The cavalry ... double quotes. Won't find this place. The canyon mouth is hidden, and we have friends who watch the approaches. Behind them, the sound of pursuit had faded. The cavalry horses couldn't find the entrance, or perhaps they'd given up the chase. Either way, the immediate danger had passed. Come, you need food and rest. The old woman led them toward the settlement. Children ran alongside their horses, chattering in a mixture of languages. English and Spanish, Comanche and Cherokee, all blended into something new. What is this place? Home, for people who don't fit anywhere else. Ellie looked around at the faces surrounding them. Mixed-blood children, former slaves, displaced. Indians, white folks who'd chosen love over convention. All of them united by the simple desire to live free. How many people? 200, maybe more. Hard to count when folks come and go. They dismounted in front of a large building that served as both meeting hall and inn. The structure was solid, built to last, built by people who planned to stay. You can rest here tonight. Tomorrow we'll find you a place to build. Build. What? Whatever you want. A house, a shop, a life. The words carried weight beyond their meaning. For the first time in months, Ellie allowed herself to think beyond survival. To imagine a future that included more than just running and hiding. Hector took her hand as they climbed the steps to the inn. His fingers were warm, steady, real. Together they walked into the building, leaving the dust and fear outside. The room was simple but clean. A bed, a washstand, a window that looked out over the valley. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. A place to rest, to heal, to decide what came next. We made it. We did. What now? Now we start over. Spring came to Haven Valley with wildflowers and the sound of children laughing. Ellie stood in the doorway of the trading post she'd built, watching Hector work with a group of young ones in the meadow. His legs carried him with easy grace now, stronger than they'd ever been before. Again, he called to a boy who'd stumbled while trying to walk a fallen log. Balance comes from inside. Feel the ground through your feet. The boy nodded, face serious with concentration. He was maybe 8 years old, son of a Cherokee woman and a freed slave. His parents had arrived in the valley 3 months ago, carrying stories of towns that wouldn't let them stay together. Like this, the boy took careful steps along the log, arms outstretched for balance. This time he made it to the end without falling, his face lit up with triumph. Good, now help your sister. Ellie smiled, watching Hector guide the children through their exercises. He'd become the valley's unofficial teacher, working with anyone who needed to learn something new. Reading and writing for the adults, games and stories for the children, healing practices for those who showed interest. The trading post had grown beyond her original plans. What started as a small cabin had expanded into a complex of buildings, serving the entire valley. Goods flowed in from the outside world, carried by traders who asked no questions about the settlement's unusual population. Mrs. Williams? She turned to find Mary Beth, the schoolteacher's daughter, holding a letter. The girl was maybe 16, with the quick intelligence that came from growing up between worlds. This came with the supply wagon. Ellie took the letter, recognizing Arthur Morgan's careful handwriting. He wrote twice a year, updating them on the outside world and the people they'd left behind. News was usually sparse, but she treasured each word. Thank you. She opened the letter carefully, preserving the paper. Writing materials were precious here, reused until they fell apart. The news was mixed. Dutch van der Linde's gang had been scattered, most of them dead or captured. Colonel Favors had been reassigned to a desk job in Washington after his failed pursuit ended in political embarrassment. The war between settlers and tribes continued, but it was moving farther west, away from places that mattered to them. Good news? Hector had approached while she read, his lesson with the children finished for the day. Sweat gleamed on his forehead, but he wasn't breathing hard. The work that would have exhausted him a year ago now barely winded him. Arthur's well. The dangers we left behind are mostly gone. Good. He settled beside her on the bench she'd placed outside the trading post. It had become their evening ritual, watching the sun set over the valley while they planned the next day's work. Do you ever miss it? Miss what? The old life, the cabin, the solitude. He was quiet for a long moment, considering. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful thought. I miss the simplicity. Here, we're responsible for more than just ourselves. Is that bad? No, just different. A group of children ran past, chasing fireflies in the gathering dusk. Their laughter echoed off the valley walls, a sound that had become as familiar as birdsong. Among them ran the boy who'd been practicing on the log, his steps sure and confident now. You're good with them. They remind me of something. What? Hope. The word hung between them, simple and profound. Hope was what had brought them here, what kept them building when building seemed impossible. Hope that two broken people could heal each other, that love could overcome the barriers the world tried to build. The council wants to expand the school. More teachers, more students. Word is spreading about what we've built here. More families are coming. That's good. It means we'll need more of everything. Food, supplies, housing. We'll manage. She leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him. The gesture was automatic now, born of countless evenings. Spent this way. Comfort taken and given without thought. Do you think we'll always be here? I think we'll be wherever we need to be. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I have. The sun disappeared behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Stars began to appear, faint pinpricks of light in the deepening blue. The same stars that had watched them flee through the night, now witness to their peace. Mrs. Williams? They turned to find Dr. Martinez approaching, his medical bag in hand. He'd arrived 6 months ago, a former army surgeon who'd grown tired of patching up wounds from senseless conflicts. The Thompsons had their baby, a girl. How are they? Healthy. Both of them. The father asked if you might visit tomorrow. Help with the naming ceremony. Of course. Dr. Martinez nodded and continued on his way. The birth was the valley's third this year. Each new life a small victory against the forces that tried to tear families apart. A girl. Yes. What do you think they'll name her? Something hopeful. Later, after the stars had emerged in full glory, they walked home to the cabin they'd built together. It was larger than her old place, with room for guests and a workshop where Hector crafted the tools and furniture the valley needed. Tomorrow I want to start teaching the Hernandez boy to read. How old is he? 12. Never had the chance to learn. You'll be patient with him. I'll try. She watched him bank the fire, preparing for bed. His movements were economical, practiced. The gestures of a man who'd found his place in the world and settled into it. Hector? Yes? When you were broken under the cottonwoods, did you think this was possible? He paused, poker in hand, considering. The fire cast dancing shadows on his face, highlighting the scars that told his story. I thought about dying with honor, about facing the end like a warrior. And now? Now I think about living with purpose, about teaching children to walk when they stumble, about building something that lasts. Is that enough? It's everything. She moved to stand beside him, her hand finding his. Their fingers intertwined, a gesture as natural as breathing. Two people who'd learned to walk together, who'd found their way from brokenness to wholeness. Outside, the valley settled into sleep. Families gathered around their fires. Children listened to bedtime stories. Lovers held each other close. The ordinary miracle of people living their lives in peace. Ready for bed? Ready. They climbed the stairs together, her hand still in his. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new people seeking shelter, new opportunities to build something better. But tonight, they had each other and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Through the bedroom window, she could see the meadow where Hector taught the children. In the morning, he'd be there again, helping small feet find their balance, teaching uncertain steps to become confident strides. The lonely black widow had found her paralyzed Comanche man and taught him to walk. But in the teaching, she'd learned something too. That healing wasn't a destination but a journey, one best traveled with someone who understood the weight of carrying on. The valley slept around them, peaceful and secure. And in their bed, two people who'd learned to trust again, held each other close, dreaming of the students they'd teach and the lives they'd help rebuild. Some stories ended with death and sorrow. This one ended with children learning to walk, with love growing strong enough to shelter others, with hope taking root in ground that had once seemed barren. And that is all to the story, for now. Please, let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. And if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.